Welcome to the Breakneck Podcast. As always, I'm here with Matt Pashansky and myself, Ian Sweeney. Got a great topic. Tell us, Matt, what are we going to talk about this week?
This is a topic we've been following for several weeks, which is the AI browser. And, we invited Ricky Sutton on, and he talked about the antitrust litigation that was going on at that time around the Chrome browser and how owning even the data from that Chrome browser would be incredibly useful for companies like Openai, who essentially want to give you an AI version of the internet. And so there's been a lot of progress, I think, in the last month. Of course, ChatGPT has their own browser now called Atlas. So there's been a lot going on. And I think it's worth bringing up because so much of what we do is on the web, and the web is the same thing as the browser. If we don't have a browser, we don't have the same web. And if we don't have the web, we don't have SaaS. We don't have lots of stuff. So if the browser is going away or the browser is significantly changing, if the idea of a web page is significantly changing, like I don't care what you do, I don't care what industry you're in, you need to pay attention to this because it's going to make your business not exist anymore. It's just like if we went from cars to riding spaceships.
Yeah. And we're circling back around to it primarily because of Atlas being launched. I got an opportunity to play with it a little bit. Let's talk about some use cases and what it looks like for those who haven't seen it. So, by the way, there's a couple of other players out there. Perplexity has Comet. The browser company, I believe, has something called Dia, which I've played with as well. I think all of them are based on Chromium, so the open source platform from Google. To look at one of these things, particularly Atlas, let's focus on Atlas. Looks very similar. Open it up. You're not seeing a fundamental change in terms of the UI. What it does have two sort of fairly significant differences. The search bar is not Google. The search is actually ChatGPT, which, yeah, okay, fine. But when you get into it, that's actually a fairly big change. And then it has this sort of companion sidebar where ChatGPT is browsing the web with you. So let's talk about a couple of examples of things that it can do. One that I tried with it, I'm going away this weekend. And I wanted to order some food, that I can take with me and eat while we're traveling and all the rest. So off we went to Amazon, opened up that ChatGPT sidebar, said, hey, go ahead, find me stuff that is good for the weekend. We got a vegetarian, we've got this many people, here's the approximate budget. Off it went and did the list. So it is using that web agent, right, to kind of navigate and look at what's going on.
Did it build you like a cart or did it just list things that you could buy with links?
Well, that was the first big issue. It told me it would build me a cart. And then it said, here's all the stuff for you in the sidebar. And I said, what about the cart? And it said, oh, I can't build a cart. And the reason it can't build a cart is actually a challenge. I imagine we'll get over this. And you are alluding to this, and we're kind of restructuring what a web page is and how we interact. But essentially, I imagine ChatGPT looks and smells an awful lot like a bot. So Amazon is like, nah, no, you're not coming anywhere close to this. So
it's a huge problem for Amazon, for anyone to understand buyer intent except Amazon. I remember we had several projects back when I was running part of a big services organization that interfaced with Amazon, the company, not AWS, but the Amazon. And we were told very clearly that leaking any sort of Amazon buyer data to Google is like the number one firewall, and you cannot. So it's like it's almost like one of these like dealing with banking details for a normal person. It's like that's the gold for AWS, and I think I'm just bringing this up because this gets to the heart of what happens instead of going from a kind of like an open source neutral browser that Google is kind of like the sponsor of, which is, Chrome has certain things, but it's not an invasive spyware on its own. It enables invasive spyware, but on its own, it's not enabled. So if you are AWS or Amazon and you don't want to have cookies and browser spyware stuff on your site, then you're safe. Google isn't going to collect it. But what OpenAI is proposing is that they will directly be accessing Amazon's website, which is that's like prime directive at Amazon is don't
It is,
let
but
anyone else know what our buyers are.
I think that'll and probably worth a separate conversation. That's going to need to get resolved though, because if I am giving the agency to purchase on my behalf, and it can't, then Amazon loses the sale. So let's maybe set that aside for a second and talk about a couple of use cases and then circle back to why now and what's going on. So the other interesting thing is memory, right? I'm looking on my screen, I've got about 12 tabs open and a couple more down here. And often I'm jumping between them and trying to do different things. So I'm holding stuff in real-time memory in my brain. That's a big reason for OpenAI to want this browser, right? To have their own proprietary browser, because A, they can facilitate that from a utility perspective for me, but more importantly, they're getting this broad sense of how I'm interacting, the things I care about. And then the third use case that is a little bit more specific to our worlds is, I suppose I would call it visual inspection or visual interrogation of web pages and websites. Right now, you go to ChatGPT and say, "Hey, I want to do this thing," and it says, "Oh well, what's the website?" And it goes to the website and maybe is able to look, but now it's sitting alongside you. It's this companion that's interacting with you. So it's another sort of dimension of understanding that the browser has. The question that I was asking myself is, why now? Why is
Mhm.
OpenAI kind of launching it now? A couple of things. They have the user base, right? They're at scale. I think it's 1 million actives per week. Um, they have a very, very small fraction of data, not just OpenAI. Um, they need to expand that data. So it makes a lot of sense. I think the third part really here that's important is Mr. Altman's fundraising needs probably require them to have another string in their bow. So
Um, you talk about accessing, like, doing things for you on a website. I think it's not, so the modal thing that everyone says an agent's going to do for you is book a flight. And the thing is, if you've ever tried to book a flight with Google, it's exceptionally easy. The only hard part about it is that I should go into my 1Password and make sure every single last detail. So I can just push 1Password and that loads it all up, right? So it's like, what about that requires $1 trillion of CapEx, to fix? A well done website, as Google Flights does not need an agent. If anything, and like we've talked about this with agents before, there's the right mode for various type of data exchange, right? Nobody wants to, as Joe Alicata said on the podcast, have a recipe read to them. You want to see a recipe. And similarly, I don't want an agent to book the flight for me. I just want if my details are put in quickly, and Google's and the airline websites have gone almost like 98% of the way there to just, you can book them 2-3 minutes, especially if you're already like a frequent flyer on United and you click and you're already signed in, then you're saving 30 or 40 seconds. And the downside is maybe I booked the wrong flight. So it's absolutely not a use case that anyone should focus on. And similarly, Amazon has gone very, very far at optimizing how easy it is to purchase things. They have they have a patent for one-click buying, which is like, how is that patentable? Come on.
Mhm.
But they've optimized the hell out of that. And if there is any kind of friction still, it's to get you to up buy and things like that. So they're going to have a strong incentive not to let an agent do it, because they've done about as much as they want to do to make it as simple to buy as possible. It's like, where's the role for the agent?
We can go in two directions with this. Let's roll that up into the overall value of the Atlas browser and their equivalents today. So we talked a lot about why OpenAI wants it, and you've just kind of pointed out, well, maybe we don't want it as consumers. There's sort of my rule of thumb is, if you can make something an order of magnitude better, people are almost guaranteed to switch. There might be other factors, right?
Right.
Now, if you take a commodity item where you get the same product from everybody, a small change in the price will allow you to shift or will incent you to shift, right? If you're buying milk, organic milk, and it's 50 cents cheaper here versus there, well, you probably just buy the cheaper one, right?
Mhm.
So where does the browser sit on that spectrum of pure commodity versus at the other end of the spectrum, something that you really care about and it needs to be significantly better in order for you to shift?
Yeah, and I think everyone's assumption is that these agents are going to like do web browsing for you or use an individual website. I don't think there's that much juice to squeeze because I mean, you've used like, we've all used extremely good websites and it's just like click, 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 or like, um, the airlines. I just took several flights, so I'm, it's like you log in, they say, hey, your flight's been delayed, or hey, here's your boarding pass. It's not that much left. We're talking about a couple minutes. So, if your 10x is the value, it's like it has to be 12 seconds. And my particular, I haven't used the browsers too much because the first time I used it, it just was pulling teeth. Well, what do you mean? What do you mean? What about this? What detail? And it's back and forth in a chat. And it was 30 or 40 seconds that I'm used to. I know which websites do what. I have years of training. I just typed, I'm there, I'm done within 3 or 4 seconds. What's the weather today? What's your location? Well, my location is already stored by Google, which already knows my address. Like, why am I having this back and forth with you? They want to gain all that memory and context about the user and all of the things that Google has. And I get that's why they want the browser. But Google's been doing that for 20 years. And if the standard is you need a 10x improvement, it's pretty hard. I think it's not going to be trivial for them.
Well, yeah, I don't know that you need a 10x. I'm trying to work out where on the like, is it a tiny marginal change, which is when it's a commoditized thing? Yes, you would do. When it's something more, a more complex purchasing decision. But to maybe answer my own question, I think it's probably somewhere in the middle. So, is there a killer feature in there today? No,
Mm-mm.
there just isn't, right? So you're less likely to just jump. Now, one of the things that we're all going to probably have to get used to here is we don't really know how to use these AI browsers, right? We haven't kind of exercised those muscles, our muscles, that didn't really exist. So that might change in 90 days when more of us have tried it out. And we're like, oh, it's kind of, I didn't really, yeah, I never thought about using it that way. Um, but I do see challenges ahead for them. It's not, I haven't spent too much time thinking about it. It's not immediately apparent to me that there's a huge opportunity to have that killer feature in there, right? To your point,
Mhm.
agents, yeah, okay, it might be in some cases be a bit quicker and a bit more helpful. But in order to do that today, I've got to move all my bookmarks and any add-ons, and I've got to learn how to use this thing and blah, blah,
I
blah.
think one of the things that we need to start building the capability of is understanding where AI is going to have significant improvements in the near future. Because if I'm a product manager at OpenAI and I make the decision to release this browser as it is, now clearly this version is not a Google killer, not a Chrome killer or anything like that. But they probably get 50,000 people a day doing something on it easily, right? If I'm looking at zero data, or maybe they hired somebody from Google who understood how Google works, and now I need to go try this new browser modality, which is, I don't think is great, but they're getting 50,000, 100,000 people a day, probably using Atlas. It would be my guess, given that they have a 800 million person install base, and they can keep that as high as they want by prompting people and having a call to action to go download this browser on their very high volumes. And this is how Google developed products in 2005. Gmail, Google Maps, all of that vintage of absolutely game-changing products, they were able to refer people from their thing that everybody was looking at, which is the search page. And I think ChatGPT has that same search page. 800 million people is incredible, right? And so you can run those experiments, right? Now, the question is, if I'm that product manager who makes a decision to release this not great product, do I care? Do I think, hey, this is going to change the world in this version? Or, hey, we have all this other capabilities in our lab, and I need a platform for 100,000 people a day to give me some sort of feedback so I can iterate my product. And I think, I've been using a lot of different ones, like Grok, for instance, that's kind of built into Twitter or X, and it was absolute trash at the beginning. But then they found some niches like the Grok talking to people in threads, or you can click a button and it'll explain the context. There's a lot of times I read a tweet, I'm like, what are these people going on about? And I click Grok. So they find these emergent capabilities
Uh-huh.
from what was initially an extremely unimpressive release. And I'm thinking we need to develop that same kind of understanding of that process when we see a crappy AI product get released, especially from a very well funded and a company with, I'm assuming, lots of hidden capabilities that we don't understand yet, as a way to open up that iterative cycle so that they can start developing. Because the things that Grok can do now, I think no one says, oh, Grok is unnecessary, even though it was a worse model than ChatGPT, because Grok is now interacting in these social networks and doing these other things that they were able to discover.
Yeah. Yeah. 100% agree. I would not measure the potential or the success on this first version. At the end of the day, I think what they wanted was their own front door to the internet. Currently, they go through Chrome or IE or Firefox, um, and they're laying the foundations for new stuff. I'd love to sit in the exec level product conversations because I have this image of different threads, being pulled together. Like we talk about every single episode, multimodal,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
what I think really what they're doing here is they kind of created a front door into to allow us consumers to deliver more information into this trove of data that will be at, like the Johnny Ives thing will come in. There's a bunch more stuff that will come in, but fundamentally the most important door is that front door to the internet, which now they own a door into the internet, and they'll basically start chipping away, maybe maybe enterprise or something, like they'll do some special stuff in there, but they now have the latitude to get all this pipe to get the data in, and also to present interaction models that are new, and they can just go build them and off they go.
Yeah. And again, one of the things that I saw recently that has fundamentally shifted my understanding of what we're going to be doing in terms of building product over the next few years is the voice agents, which are a little slow, a little wonky, a little tough to integrate, but those are one of those things that are clearly going to change. Now, Google has all kinds of capabilities that they're adding into the browser via their existing browser properties. And OpenAI has those same models, but something like a voice control of a browser, you can imagine, of course, that being much better. I think everybody thinks voice is terrible now because Alexa and Siri are your main, and Alexa Plus just released on my Alexa. I bought the Alexa stuff over COVID,
Yeah.
and they released Alexa Plus, and it sounds much better. I think it's embedding a lot of the LLM capabilities, but obviously on years old hardware, they probably need to release a new version of Alexa with much better on device processing. I don't know. It's probably good enough just over the web with longer round trip. But the Alexa Plus voice is now possibly going to reach the quality that I would see at Gemini Live. And so you have to have a multimodal experience if you're going to release a voice agent, because we know that there's things that voice is great at, but there's also things that voice is absolutely wretched at, like reading recipes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. Any closing thoughts on the browsers?
Yeah, there was one other topic that I want to refresh, and hopefully everyone who's listening to this has listened to every single one of our episodes and knows all of my hobby horses. But if you haven't, let me just refresh the topic, which is what's going to happen to the webpage. And something that happened this week, maybe we can move to like, what did I see this week that impressed me, is Elon Musk released a post website thing in my mind. We have Wikipedia, which is the canonical website. It's a URL with a defined set of content that changes slowly that people can access, they can index, and he released something called Grokopedia, 0.1. So it was the very first, and he says once we get to 1.0, it's going to be far better. But what's impressive about it is he basically built 800,000 Wikipedia-style articles, I think, off of a superset, a much bigger superset than Wikipedia has. Of course, they're probably using a lot of Wikipedia content in their model to build these things, but they're also ingesting, I'm assuming, all of Twitter history, every news article that's ever been written, all that stuff. It simply, Wikipedia is human beings putting this stuff in. And then there's all the reversion wars of, people having opinions on this. And this is just Elon's AI and the way that Elon wants it, writing history. But what's important about it is you can think of this as a generatively produced website for it's a middle ground between an LLM response and a website in my mind. It's a cached LLM response. If I want to know about the Gulf of Tonkin affair, it's not just the website, but it's also they have all of the data and probably like a much more expansive cloud of data that they needed to produce to fully understand the Gulf of Tonkin. And so you could also do things like produce a podcast on the Gulf of Tonkin or things like that. It's just like whatever representation is on Wikipedia, that's all you're getting. On Grokopedia, you get this generated response, but then this cloud of information. And that's my point is, I think it's a middle ground between LLM, which is accessing the entire network of all content and driving it just immediately from the pure LLM, or websites. And right now it's LLMs. They go look at the website and then they report back. And Grokopedia feels like this new thing, this middle ground, which is the AI version of a website. So that's something we've been looking for. And I think this is one of the most exciting things I've seen on that angle.
Awesome. I'm going to punt on my thing of the week because you got me. I want to reflect on that. Is it interrogatable? I
mean, like what I saw was 0.1, but seeing the way that the rest of the Elon websites have iterated very quickly, X, Grok, they just massively improved their their video generation and stuff like that. Like, I mean, they're investing in this gigantic Colossus cluster in Memphis. So I think they have leading edge AI capabilities, but with a much faster kind of move faster and break things Elon approach. So I would not be shocked if Grokopedia really did, and he seems excited about it. And the first version looks pretty good. And it's a great idea, which is like, why would I serve a new response to every question when I should just be saying, well, here's Grokopedia, go look at that. So I'd imagine there's going to be both AIs using Grokopedia and then Grokopedia deploying AIs back to you, because that's what I've seen from the rest of his product development.
So I've been thinking about this thing called MCP of me, right? So MCP is like essentially an AI, is an API available to AI. And so let me abstract a little bit. One of the challenges, and I was thinking about while we were doing the research on the browser stuff, one of the challenges is such a tiny slice of all the information and data available to LLMs. And obviously the AI browser, an attempt to suck more in. But like, just to illustrate it, if you're 70 years old, you probably spent roughly half your life in the internet era. So, we could suggest that half the information in your head is in your head and it's not available to the LLMs. And once you die, it will disappear. Like the big example, I think, is, the banks and the insurance companies use COBOL. There's about 2 people in the world that know COBOL anymore, which is a bit of an issue, right? So, but that's a kind of an extreme example. But I was asking Gemini about this earlier, and it suggested that a 0.1% of all the world's information is available to the LLMs. 0.1%, 1,000.
I believe that, yeah.
So we then have this, we talked a little bit about Amazon and the purchase intent, but actually want to purchase. So I've given this agent this approval to buy something on my behalf, and Amazon is, no, you're a bot, you can't. So that's going to have to be worked out. And it might be some sort of MCP-like scenario where, oh, you're a bot, but you're representing Ian, so I'll let you through. And so I can see a world, going back to MCP of me, where we can create a commercial flywheel for people who have information that they want to put out there, right? And so today the way it works is you put information out there for free and maybe you can monetize it through advertising. And that's why there's a bunch of information that isn't on the internet, because you're like, well, how am I going to get paid for this information? So I actually see, going back to this MCP of me thing, if you're an expert in Weber carburetors, which is a fairly obscure topic, but it's a fairly
Yeah, I used to have a Volkswagen. That was one of the top, aftermarket carburetors that you could put
yeah.
on,
So
your
I don't know how many of those there are in the world, but the people who know how to tune those are disappearing, yet they're still in use. So, hey, Matt, you're the world's expert in Webers. Do you want to share that knowledge? Do you want to monetize it? We'll build up your own LLM and we'll have this MCP of me. And it'll show up in two ways. It'll show up in the Grokpedia one where I go as a person, I look at it and I interrogate it. And I'm like, oh, what about these jets? Or what about that? Or I have a central system that is able to call via MCP to get, Matt, the Weber guru's answers on my questions.
I love the idea. And number one, I want someone to call an MCP server about something I know about or something about me rather than going to a DSP or some kind of data service that has collected my information through browser. So it's like, if we can get out of the surveillance capitalism that we're in now,
Mm-hmm.
because you say ads, like, oh, ads. It's like, no, they're collecting gigantic amounts of data in a way that you don't control. I would rather say, hey, this is what I'm interested in. This is what I do. I installed Alexa Plus last night, like I said, and she asked, what are the type of movies you like? I'm not playing this game now, but at some point,
Yeah.
that maybe that's preferable if that is a performant enough service that I tell one thing one time, or even better, what if I said it one thing one time with some I controlled, like people have their what's that review website where people review movies?
No, like Rotten Tomatoes or one of those.
There's a personal one where you leave all of your movie reviews. I've always imagined that is that I'm going to talk with my own personal owned, personalization reference point, and then services can get access to it. I like that a lot. And then as far as people having a specific particular expertise, I think now we're talking about vertical agents, which is agents that are not multi-purpose like what we see with Atlas, where it's going to do anything for you on the web, but rather agents that are so well refined where the owner of that agent and the person who's responsible for that agent understands what kinds of things that agent's expected to do by a limited group of people and is constantly maintaining that agent at the state of the art. And I think we're going to see those happen more and more. And there will be more and more types of specialized things that agents would do. For instance, book a flight for me. Well, they would have to have access to many different systems. So there's a place for giving your data to a vertical agent in a way that you wouldn't want to give it to ChatGPT. And we'll see if that wins out, or if the alternative is one super agent does everything kind of crappy, knows everything about you. And I'm sure Sam Altman would love that.
All right, Matt, thanks for that. We'll wrap it there.
Thanks, Ian.
Bye now.